Jake and I had been living on the streets for a long time when we met Tom and Mike. The four of us made a new crew, and we started working together. Jake and I only did little jobs before meeting those guys. We'd break into cars and steal stereos, back when that was the crime of the day. More recently, we'd taken to stealing packages from people's doorsteps. Made a good living that way for a while. I know what you're going to say. Don't waste your breath, folks. Save your judgment for someone who's got a fuck left to give. I can tell you right now, I ran out a while back. I never pictured myself as someone who'd steal. I used to look down on those people. But when you spend enough hours hungry, all those morals and ethics you once had start to get a little bit more flimsy. And the lines you'll cross become blurred until they're gone altogether. We'd been making decent enough cash stealing people's packages from their doorsteps, but people were starting to get wise. Every house had a camera now, and people were even setting out trap packages with pepper spray explosives, glitter bombs, GPS trackers, and who knew what else. The cameras made me a lot more nervous than the glitter bombs. I had a record, and my features and build were distinctive enough to get me picked up under suspicion of theft, even if I covered my face. We were looking for a fresh hustle. Enter Tom and Mike. They were new to the camp and didn't look like they'd been on the streets for long. They were about our age, in their late 20s, so Jake and I became fast friends with them. It helped that they had dope and seemed to know where and how to make money. We eventually asked them about it one night when Tom pulled out a bag of weed and started rolling joints. "Oh, look at this guy," Jake said, elbowing me with his giant meaty arm. "That's a huge bag you got there, bud. Careful who sees that or you're gonna get rolled faster than you can roll up those spliffs." "Ain't nobody stupid enough," Mike said. I thought this was a bold statement. On the other hand, nobody had messed with them, and that was odd since the camp usually had a few hazing rituals. Unless someone really seemed like they wouldn't take it very well or were violent, in which case the initiations were ignored altogether. "Hey, Tom," I said, trying not to pry, but also curious. Where are you guys getting all this cash from anyways? Tell me if I'm getting out of line and asking. I'm just hurting, man. He looked at Mike with a question in his eyes. He shrugged back at Tom and nodded his head almost imperceptibly. "Alright, I guess I could use a couple more guys. If you both want in, I'll tell you. But if you're not ready to get your hands dirty, just let me know now. We'll forget this ever happened and act like you never asked." I gave Jake a look, and we agreed we'd do anything for the kind of money they were flashing. With the cash they were making, they wouldn't be on the streets for long, I thought. "Okay. Here's what we've been doing." Tom started to tell us what they'd been up to for the last couple weeks. Our eyes widened as he told us how they had been making so much money. They had a place lined up for tomorrow night, and we were going to split the score 4 ways. The next night around 3 a.m., we were in the back of an old white windowless van, parked on a side street in a decent neighborhood. Tom was going over the plan again. He handed us each a mask and a gun. They were loaded, he said, so we were to be careful with them. My hands were shaking. I'd never done anything like this before. My stomach was tied up in knots and felt fluttery and strange. I had a stress headache, but was afraid to let on that anything was wrong. I nodded my head and listened carefully. We got out of the van, walked around to the back of the house. Mike used a crowbar to open the back door, and we went inside, careful to not make a noise. The house was dark and quiet. They had scouted it well. No alarm, no pets, single old man with enough money to make it worth our while. He also had no family. How they could get this information I had no idea and didn't want to ask. Plausible deniability could have its advantages, especially when it came to committing crimes. Jake bumped into the stove in the darkness. It scraped loudly a few centimeters across the floor and made a loud bang as it lifted up slightly and fell back down. The big bastard was clumsy and he knew it. "Shit, sorry," he whispered. I could have slapped the dumb son of a bitch. "Shut the fuck up," Mike said under his breath. We heard movement from a room down the hall. Tom motioned us to hide, and we waited for someone to come from the bedroom to investigate. Nothing. I worried for a moment the man could be calling the cops, but then we heard him open his bedroom door. "Hello?" he called. We waited silently in the darkness as he walked toward us down the hallway. I saw the silhouette of his body appear in the kitchen, and he started to say something else when Mike hit him in the back of the head with a pry bar. The man collapsed on the kitchen floor, and blood began to pool around him. Mike jammed the end of the pry bar through his eye and into his brain. The man's leg kicked once violently, and then he was completely still. The air escaped his lungs a few moments later, and a loud snoring sound that made me jump. "Fuck!" I said loudly. "You killed him!" "And?" Mike looked at me, his eyebrows raised. He dropped the pry bar on the floor and opened the fridge. Took out a 6-pack of beer and tossed one to me. Tom went into the living room and sat down on a big recliner, pulling the lever on the side and kicking his feet up. We followed him hesitantly and sat down on leather couches. I felt like I might throw up. He said, throwing his hands behind his head and settling in. "How about a bit of TV, boys?" He grabbed the remote control off the table beside him and turned it on. A preacher was on the screen. He was sitting on a chair in a TV set that was made to look like a living room, gesticulating and speaking in a southern accent to the camera. His eyes were watering and brimmed with tears. "And I can see that you have the cancer. You have it now in your lungs. Now, go, I say, cancer. Go and bother this woman no more. Go to your doctor, Sharon, and he'll say, 'How can this be?' And you'll say, 'Jesus, he healed me. Praise his name.' And I see you, Jason. I see you have fallen in with a bad crowd. I see you don't want to follow this crowd no more. The Lord says, go. Follow this doubting Thomas no more. Do not follow this demon, this devil posing as a man." Tom changed the channel suddenly. My heart was hammering in my chest. They called me Jam on the streets, but my real name was Jason. It felt like the preacher had been talking right to me. I didn't dare say a word. Jake knew my real name and was giving me a look out of the corner of his eye, but he didn't speak either. We just sat there, covered in blood spatter, watching a Price is Right rerun. Bob Barker was holding his long, thin microphone and asking a woman with no restraint or inhibitions, "Have you seen this game before, Susie?" while she bounced up and down and pulled on his expensive suit. "Yes, Bob, it's my favorite." We sat there until the sun began to stream in through the windows, and I felt like I was beginning to smell the dead body, which lay only a few feet away. Tom finally got up and said he was going to bed. Mike stayed behind and gave us orders. He told us to clean up the mess while he got us fresh clothes and got supplies to take care of the body. The plan was to bury the man in the backyard later that night. For the rest of the day, we would stay inside and lay low. If anyone came to the door, we would assess the situation and either let them leave or take care of them as needed. Mike told us not to worry much about that. He said the man was a hermit. When I asked how he knew, he just ignored me. That night, we buried the man and took over his house as if it were our own. We spent the next week living there in comfort and solitude. No one rang the doorbell. We sold all of his possessions to a fence who didn't ask any questions. We used his bank cards, ATMs, covering our faces with low-brimmed ball caps or fake mustaches and dark sunglasses. Tom told us this was what they did. When they ran out of resources in one house, they just moved on to another. They always scouted ahead very thoroughly. Mike was always on his laptop on various forums and Facebook groups, posing as a survivalist. He eventually revealed that many of the doomsday preppers who posted on the sites were isolated and alone. He would prey on the most vulnerable and would build a rapport with them over weeks and months before finding a way to get their address. I realized he was very good at what he did. One method involved posing as a beautiful single woman who was really into country music and the apocalypse. I was really uncomfortable with the whole thing, to say the least. I had begun to severely regret joining up with the two of them. Jake, on the other hand, was getting more and more accustomed to the idea of it all. He started to get really chummy with the two of them, and I began to feel left out and alone. One night I decided to get out of there. I would leave town and hitchhike to a different city where I would start over, away from those maniacs. The preacher on the TV had been right, I began to realize. I had fallen in with a very bad crowd, and my only hope was to get the hell away from them before it was too late. I left in the middle of the night without looking back. I wanted to take some of the cash we had accumulated, but didn't want them to come looking for me. I walked out with only the clothes on my back. I had been homeless and penniless for years, and I could do it again. I hitched my way east, away from the city where I'd grown up, traveling for weeks. I finally wound up in a little quiet town where I got a good feeling immediately. I went into the woods and set up camp with what little supplies I had. I didn't want to bother anyone, but I needed some money for food, so I went downtown to panhandle. Instead of offering me a few quarters, the first woman who saw me offered me a frickin' job at the grocery store her family owned. She said they didn't have homeless in their little town and didn't need to start now. She was a deacon at the church nearby. They offered to put me up in the basement of a little house on the property where the old pastor lived. The new preacher there had his own home, so the little house next to the church was vacant, and they had no qualms with me staying there as long as I needed to. I was incredibly thankful. I couldn't believe my luck. I tried my best not to screw things up. I quit smoking dope and drinking. I wanted to change my life, I realized. The years went by, and I ended up getting promoted a couple times at the grocery store where I had been hired as a cart boy. They made me a stalker, then a bagger, and eventually they trusted me enough to make me a cashier. I made enough money to start giving the church a few $100s a month for rent. The preacher told me I didn't have to, but I insisted. I told him I could find my own place pretty soon, but he said not to worry, I could stay in the little house on the church property for as long as I needed to. And one night, I heard a noise from upstairs. It woke me up from sleeping, sounding like something heavy had skidded across the floor for a second. My brain was still half asleep, so I wasn't sure if maybe I had dreamt it. "Hello?" I called out. There was no response. I got up, still numb from sleep. I didn't like the feeling I had as I opened my bedroom door and walked out into the darkness of the hallway, but I ignored it. I padded up the floor on my bare feet towards the direction where I'd heard the noise. I thought maybe it was a raccoon outside knocking over the trash can. I was preparing to open the closet door and grab the broom when I felt something hard hit me in the back of the head. I didn't lose consciousness, but my legs gave out beneath me and I fell down suddenly as the room began to spin. My skull flared with terrible pain. "Is that who I think it is?" The voice, so familiar. "That's him." Jake's voice, apologetic. "Jam?" He had hit me over the head with the pry bar. It had been his turn to open the door this time, I guessed. "That you were too good for us, huh, Jam?" Tom's voice was taunting, humorless. I groaned, unable to make words. "You okay, man?" Jake asked. I looked up and saw there was two of them, spinning around in circles above me. I saw a hand reach and grab the pry bar, and Jake looked up, surprised. The pointy end of the bar came down towards my face and entered my eye socket, causing a fresh flare of bright, hot pain there. Blood poured out of my face as I screamed. Tom took the bar and flipped it around so the curved end stuck out. He grabbed the other end with both hands and smiled as he swung it towards my face like a golf club. I felt it crash into my jaw and my teeth pinballed around inside my mouth. My face felt like it had been hit by a truck. I spit several teeth and lots of blood onto the floor and passed out a second later. When I woke up, I was still on the floor. They told me I had one choice. Only one choice. I had agreed to hear what they did for money, Tom said with a smile. I had pledged that I would go along, and go along I would, whether I wanted to or not. He said there were lots of ways to get people to do things they didn't want to do, but that he would rather not go that route. I nodded my head, defeated. "Here's what's gonna happen," he said. "I'm gonna untie you, and you're gonna behave. You're gonna do exactly what we tell you from here on out. Understand, Jam?" I told him I would. Jake untied me, and Mike came around in front of me with a very sharp blade in his hand. "Just in case you decide to back out again, we're going to make sure you never say a word to anyone. Not ever again." His eyes were black, I noticed for the first time. Both of their eyes were completely black. The irises reflected no color. They looked like a pair of vampires in the darkness. Jake suddenly grabbed my chin from behind and forced my jaw upwards with his powerful hands. Tom pulled up on my head, causing my mouth to open painfully. Mike took a long pair of tongs and reached into my mouth with them, grasping my tongue. I screamed. Mike took the sharp blade and sawed away at the root of my tongue. Coppery blood flooded my mouth, and I felt like I would drown, choking on it. Tom began to laugh, and I looked up into his face. He was a devil, I realized then, just as the preacher on TV had said. Mike began to laugh as well, and I wondered if they were both the same. A pair of demons released upon the earth to wreak havoc and destruction. As the blade tore through the muscle in my mouth, I realized I would have no choice once this was done. I would spend the rest of my days with these devils. They would never let me out of their sight after this, even with my tongue removed. They would never trust me alone again. I knew I had to escape. Before they could get me away from the house, I had to get away before they could formulate a plan to keep me prisoner. Fortunately for me, but not for the preacher, he happened to come to the door at just that moment. I knew it was him instinctively. He'd probably heard the commotion from his house just a few doors down, had heard my screams and cries of pain. He knocked tentatively on the glass, and I wished he had just called the police instead of coming here himself. "Jason?" he said, his voice muffled through the door. Tom looked at me and put a finger over his lips. Quiet. They waited silently until the doorknob began to turn back and forth. It was locked. I heard the pastor start to turn and walk away and hoped he was smart enough to call the cops. Then Tom let go of me and pulled a gun from his pocket. My eyes widened, and Mike put his hand over my mouth, holding the knife against my throat. My tongue was still lying dead in my mouth, mostly severed and bleeding profusely. I felt hot blood running down my throat and wanted to vomit. Tom went up the stairs with the gun in his hand and unlocked it. He opened the door and stepped outside. I heard the gunshot ring out and the sound of a body hitting the pavement. I closed my eyes and prayed for forgiveness. These monsters were here because of me. My mistakes had caught up with me. Finally. I saw Mike was distracted as Tom opened the door. He had seen me close my eyes and had shifted his gaze away, waiting for Tom to come back in with the body. Jake was also looking up the stairs towards the door that led outside. I took my chance, knowing I needed to do something now while I still could. I snatched the pry bar from Jake's hand and jammed it upwards into his face. It went straight into his nostril, opening it up and creating a gaping fissure. The pointed end of the pry bar went up and into the soft tissue of his brain, and he fell backwards as I yanked it out. Mike looked down in sudden surprise, and I swung the heavy steel implement at his kneecap with all of my strength. I heard it shatter as he collapsed, dropping his knife. Tom then came in, dragging the body down the stairs. He was so preoccupied with it that he didn't even see the carnage at the bottom. I grabbed the knife while he was distracted and ran up the stairs quickly. I plunged the blade into his neck just as he was about to set the body down on the landing. He screamed and turned towards me, still very much alive. I couldn't believe he wasn't on the ground after my attack, but much to my surprise, he was still full of fury and didn't look injured at all, despite the dark blood which pooled from the hole in his throat. I took the knife and stabbed him in the chest with it. I pulled it out and stabbed again and again. His eyes remained wide and open, his teeth bared in a wide grin. I kept stabbing. "You know I'm not human. So why do you think you can kill me?" He leaned forward and whispered in my ear. "Run. Go ahead and run. But I will find you," he said. He didn't even touch the gun in his waistband as I dropped the knife and ran past him, terrified. "We're gonna have lots more fun together, Jason," he called after me from the doorway as I ran from the house. I left town. I didn't know where to go, so I just walked and walked for a long time. Eventually, I passed out from blood loss and woke up in a hospital bed. I'm afraid of what will happen when I'm discharged. Will Tom find me? He has a way of finding people. And what he said as I ran from the house haunts me. "We're gonna have a lot more fun together." I think I've had all the fun I can take. Today's video was supported by patrons like Mark from Earth, Crimson Muse, Joy Burton, Diane Showers, Mark Zawal, Cheryl James, Pick Your Sticker, Teddy Dog, Clue 404, Mamakato, Dante Kincaid, Zarin Ray, Angela Donovan. If you'd like to help support the channel, please consider joining my Patreon page at patreon.com/Jordan Group Horror. As a patron, you'll get access to bonus videos and content. You'll be credited at the end of every video going forward. And if you decide to stay for 3 months, I'll name a character after you, which will be featured in the next Hollow's End story. Links to join are in the description. Thanks everyone for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment to help the channel continue to grow. And see you again next time at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope you have a great night.